Answer to Job.
665.
665. Okay, so Dr. Jung is saying that humans, and we're talking about humans 2,500 years ago or so, but he says man does not really relish any all too human inconsistencies in his gods. In other words, I guess we'd all like God to be kind of the same and a reliable guy.
But mostly a guy.
Yeah, but mostly a guy. Unfortunately. You know, it's archetypal. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know what to say about it. There are...
Well, when the Bible says in the beginning was the Word, it's going to be a guy.
Yeah, from a religious point of view, definitely, right. And, but, I mean, the Bible also said that Sophia was there before the creation, so...
Sophia?
Sophia is wisdom, and I learned from Bill, which I should have known but didn't really link up, that philosophy is actually love of Sophia, the word philosophy. Love of Sophie.
Or love of wisdom.
Love of wisdom, okay, and so so to the feminine principle is given the wisdom. And so one of the things I want to do here, I gave you the Ezekiel picture a couple weeks back. I passed it around. Remember the color picture?
Yeah.
And okay, so I want to talk a little bit about that and read that particular passage where Ezekiel describes this vision, because it sounded pretty weird to me, but it's what I get out of it is that Dr. Jung interpreted 80,000 dreams, he said, in his lifetime. And he saw, lots of images in the consulting room when he was talking to his patients. And so he had a lot more experience than I have, certainly. And so anyway, what he's saying here is that Yahweh's defeat had consequences. Now he's claiming that Yahweh was defeated because Yahweh was defeated because he has very limited consciousness. Okay, and Job had a moral bone in his body, which Yahweh didn't have. Okay, and since Yahweh is everything, he's neither good nor bad, or he's both. So Job interpreted it as both, and to an extent the Buddhists do also. I mean, they talk about duality, but they want you to rise above duality, and that's sort of what we're talking about here.
Limited consciousness. Can you kind of elaborate in the sense that what does that exactly mean?
Well,
the Abraham tradition is infinite.
Well, right, and Yahweh is infinite, but Yahweh took 400 million years to develop all the species, right? Which isn't what a serious consciousness would do, okay, with a lot of trial and error. That's Dr. Jung's point. It's a bit of a flippant point, but I mean, I think it's a bit of a flippant point. but anyway, I think it was something like this. Human beings were getting along, but basically on instinct up until about, let's say, 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. But about this time, human beings were starting to develop a conscience. And I think that's what we're talking about here, is a conscience. And so what Dr. Jung says is that Yahweh's defeat had consequences. Man's elevation morally, in other words, knowing the difference between right and wrong, or good and bad, whatever, actually caused a disturbance in the unconscious, in the collective unconscious. Okay, so in other words, there is a collective unconscious. If we're Jungians, we accept that premise, and somehow we all affect one another as we interact around the world. And obviously we're interacting a lot faster now than we were back then. But we were developing in a certain way, and gradually this conscience started to bubble up. And so then he says, since the potential builds up in the unconscious, energy moves from unconscious to conscious. Okay, and that's what he's talking about. You have a reservation about that?
No.
Okay.
Just the transcendent function.
Right, it's the transcendent function. So it's pushing up out of the unconscious. And so he says, dreams and visions are not morbid. They are quite normal. But now I want to read Ezekiel's vision, because he says it's quite normal. And, you know, as just a layman, I have to say, really? This is Ezekiel's vision of the Chariot of Yahweh. And by the way, if you look up Ezekiel's vision through Google, you'll see images of what they're talking about, okay?
I know where the Bible passage is, but
Or it's in the Dropbox also from a couple weeks ago, okay? All right, so the vision of the Chariot of Yahweh. There the hand of Yahweh came on me. I looked, a stormy wind blew from the north, a great cloud with light around it, a fire from which flashes of lightning darted, and in the center a sheen like bronze at the heart of the fire. In the center I saw what seemed like 4 animals. They looked like this. They were of human form, each had 4 faces, each had 4 wings. Their legs were straight. They had hooves like oxen, glittering like polished brass. Human hands showed under their wings. The faces of all 4 were turned to the 4 quarters. Their wings touched each other. They did not turn as they moved. Each one went straight forward. As to what they looked like, they had human faces, and all 4 had a lion's face to the right, and all 4 had a bull's face to the left, and all 4 had an eagle's face. Their wings were spread upwards. Each had 2 wings that touched, and 2 wings that covered his body. And they all went straight forward. I'm having trouble figuring out how they're all going straight forward if they're around this guy. But anyway, they all went straight forward, and they went where the Spirit urged them. They did not turn as they moved. Between these animals, something could be seen like flaming brands or torches darting between the animals. The fire flashed light, and the lightning streaked from the fire, and the creatures ran to and fro like thunderbolts. I looked at the animals. There was a wheel on the ground by each of them, one beside each of the 4. The wheels glittered as if made of chrysolite. All 4 looked alike and seemed to be made one inside the other. They went forward 4 ways and kept their course unswervingly. Their rims seemed enormous when I looked at them, and all 4 rims had eyes all the way around. When the animals went forward, the wheels went forward beside them. And when the animals left the ground, the wheels too left the ground. Where the Spirit urged them, there the wheels went, since the spirit of the animal was in the wheels. When the animals moved on, they moved on. When the former halted, the latter halted. When the former left the ground, the wheels too left the ground, since the spirit of the animal was in the wheels. Over the heads of the animals, a sort of vault, gleaming like crystal, arched above their heads. Under this vault, their wings stretched out to one another, and each had two covering his body. I heard the noise of their wings as they moved. It sounded like rushing water, like the voice of Shaddai, a noise like a storm, like the noise of a camp. When they halted, they folded their wings, and there was a noise. Above the vault, their heads was something that looked like a sapphire. It was shaped like a throne, and high up on this throne was a being that looked like a man. I saw him shine like bronze, and close too, and all around him, from what seemed his loins upward, was what looked like fire, and from what seemed his loins downwards, I saw what looked like fire, and a light all around, like a bow in the clouds on rainy days. That is how the surrounding light appeared. It was something that looked like the glory of Yahweh. I looked and prostrated myself, and I heard a voice speaking. Okay. Does that grab you in any way?
And he dropped dead of an overdose right then, right?
Something. But so what Jung says is Ezekiel's visions are of an archetypal nature, not morbidly distorted in any way. They are symptoms of a split that already existed at the time between conscious and unconscious. Okay, so as a layman, I'm not particularly seeing that. Okay, there's one other piece here.
Such an elaborate description.
Yeah.
It's almost like a, like a Picasso or something where you get multifaceted views of the same thing.
Yeah.
All at once.
Right. So it's like cubism or something. Yeah. And I think it is kind of like that. I saw a good version of it someplace. The one that I brought you was Raphael's version, but pardon?
Raphael.
Yeah, but that didn't seem to be the best one, and I had seen another one, and I looked for it in my books, and I just couldn't find it again. I thought Edinger might have done it. So in the first vision, Ezekiel has seen the essential content of the unconscious, the idea of the higher man by whom Yahweh was morally defeated and who he was later to become. Okay. So I guess that's the later paragraphs I get much better than this, but this particular paragraph, he's making the point about quaternity and the fact that they're for this and for that, and how fourness comes up in dreams and came up in alchemy a lot during the medieval period. But have you ever had a dream that had four in it? No.
Not that I'm thinking.
Yeah, I can't
But
either.
when I think, I probably got it from Jung early on, but I think in terms of quaternity.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. And
Okay.
I'll set up, you'll set up a dynamic between this and that, and then you go, well, what would run perpendicular to that so that you've got this, you generate this sort of 3D shape. And actually I'll add one more pair so that you got three pairs.
Three
you
different.
got an XYZ space.
Right.
And I was always working in that way, so that you could sort of map it in there somehow.
I see. Interestingly, I had many of my growing up years in Japan. And in Japan especially, but I think also in China, the number 4 is not a lucky number, because in Japanese it's shi. It's pronounced shi, which also means death.
Well, it's in Western mysticism, isn't it often associated with like foundation or solid, or something that stops, that holds,
Yeah,
that holds.
yeah. It's like
It's also associated with money or foundational things.
yeah.
But that's
And
just what I recall.
well, and what he was saying also was that in the first 4 books of the New Testament, it's 4, and those are the 4 pillars of
Oh, there you go.
whatever. Paragraph 665. A more differentiated consciousness must, sooner or later, find it difficult to love as a kind father a God whom, on account of his unpredictable fits of wrath, his unreliability, injustice, and cruelty, it has every reason to fear. The decay of the gods of antiquity has proved to our satisfaction that man does not relish any all too human inconsistencies and weaknesses in his gods. Likewise, it is probable that Yahweh's moral defeat in his dealings with Job had its hidden effects. Man's unintended elevation on the one hand, and on the other hand, a disturbance of the unconscious. For a while, the first mentioned effect remains a mere fact, not consciously realized, though registered by the unconscious. This contributes to the disturbance in the unconscious, which thereby acquires a higher potential than exists in consciousness. Man then counts for more in the unconscious than he does consciously. In these circumstances, the potential starts flowing from the unconscious toward the consciousness, and the unconscious breaks through in the form of dreams, visions, and revelations. Unfortunately, the book of Job cannot be dated with any certainty. As mentioned above, it was written somewhere between 600 and 300 BC. During the first half of the 6th century, Ezekiel, the prophet with the so-called pathological features, appears on the scene. Although laymen are inclined to apply this epithet to his visions, I must, as a psychiatrist, emphatically state that visions and their accompanying phenomena cannot be uncritically evaluated as morbid. Visions, like dreams, are unusual but quite natural occurrences, which can be designated as pathological only when their morbid nature has been proved. From a strictly clinical standpoint, Ezekiel's visions are of an archetypal nature and are not morbidly distorted in any way. There is no reason to regard them as pathological. They are symptoms of the split which already existed at that time between conscious and unconscious. The first great vision is made up of 2 well-ordered compound quaternities, that is, conceptions of totality, such as we frequently observe today as spontaneous phenomena. Their quinta essentia is represented by a figure which has the likeness of a human form. Here Ezekiel has seen the essential content of the unconscious, namely the idea of the higher man by whom Yahweh was morally defeated and who he was later to become.